All right. We're talking today with Jack Robinson of Grand Rapids, Michigan. The interviewer is James Smither of Grand Valley State University. Mr. Robinson, why don't you start by telling us a little bit about your own background? Where were you born and where did you grow up?
Well, I was born in Newton, Massachusetts in 1924 and grew up in Boston. But I spent my summers up on Lake George in the Adirondacks in New York State. And that's where I became interested in sailing and the water.
And what kind of experiences did you have up there when you were growing up?
Well, I raced, started when I was 10 years old in competitive racing, and went on from there. And then when the war came, I enlisted as soon as I turned 18 in the merchant.
Before we go quite that far,
Okay.
What did your father do?
My dad was when he went into the to MIT in Boston as a naval architect. Unfortunately, when he graduated, there were no jobs, so he went to work for his dad in the insurance business and stayed there for the rest of his career.
Okay, but I guess he did reasonably well if you could spend some summers on Lake George.
Well, we did. He didn't. He stayed home and worked, but he'd come up on weekends and all. But it was kind of a nice setup because my cousin had a cottage right next door to us, and the cottage was built by my great-grandfather, who was a sea captain back in during the Civil War days and under sail. So he went up and down the lake, and it was a beautiful lake, no question about that. And he spotted this location, and he said that there'd always be a breeze at this place, so that's where he chose to build the cottage. It was an interesting cottage because it had fish scale shingles and that sort of thing.
Okay. So then you decided, and did you decide right away to enlist in the Merchant Marine specifically as opposed to the Navy or Coast Guard or something?
Well, my main concern was that I would be able to go to sea because I felt that's where I could do the most good because I was familiar with ropes and the lingo and all of that. I also had a neighbor that lived up the street from me, Captain Bassett, who was the commandant at the Massachusetts Maritime Academy. And I discussed it with him. He wanted me to go to the Mass Academy, but I chose the National Academy at Kings Point because we had our sea training at sea, whereas the academy, the Mass Academy, had theirs on Long Island Sound. And I thought that was kind of inappropriate at the time.
What was wrong with Long Island Sound?
Well, nothing. It was water, but you weren't involved in the war, really, at that point. And it's funny in those days why everybody wanted to get in and do their part, so...
Now, when did you enlist?
I enlisted in September of 1942.
Okay. And were you scheduled to be drafted, did you think, or did you act before you found out?
No, I did before I found out. The day I turned 18, why I enlisted. So it was, I didn't have a draft notice or anything at that point. My older brother was in the Navy. He served in the submarine service, and but that didn't have any bearing on what I wanted to do. So,
did you hear much from him while he was gone, or I mean, did you know much about what he was doing?
No, our paths didn't cross too often. Once in a while, but when I saw more of him was when he was stationed in Boston, and at the times that I was home on leave or whatever, why then I would see him. But outside of that, why we didn't communicate much because we were too busy.
Right. Okay. Tell us a little bit about Kings Point. I mean, people might not be sure what state that's in or where it is or.
Well, the National Maritime Academy is at Kings Point, Long Island.
Mm-hmm.
It was based in the old Chrysler estate on the island.
Mm-hmm.
A beautiful location. And it was on would be the northwest corner of Long Island,
Mm-hmm.
in Great Neck. I had my basic training. I was sent down to Pass Christian, Mississippi,
Mm-hmm.
initially, and then I shipped out of Mobile, Alabama, on my first cruise.
Let's back up a little bit here and talk
Okay.
some more about the training and so forth. So you go to Kings Point first, and then Mississippi. Was that the way it worked?
No,
You were
I
in.
went to Mississippi first.
Okay. And what does basic training consist of if you're going in the Merchant Marine?
Well, teaching you how to tie knots,
Mm-hmm.
which I already knew.
Mm-hmm.
While there, I was put in charge of helping the instructor teach other cadets how to tie knots and so forth. I knew how to splice line and all, which they taught there. And it was basically physical training.
Mm-hmm.
It was short term, only about 3-4 months long,
Mm-hmm.
before we were assigned to a ship. And then we had 6 months of sea duty before we went to Kings Point.
Mm-hmm. Now, just staying in Mississippi a little bit longer, I mean, what was the place itself like, past Christian or?
Well, it was called the Inn by the Sea,
Mm-hmm.
which was a resort hotel.
Mm-hmm.
No longer in existence. Hurricanes have taken that out.
Mm-hmm.
But it was an interesting place. It was still under construction, a lot of it, especially as the base grew.
Mm-hmm.
As a matter of fact, at one point I'd also had drafting experience.
Mm-hmm.
So I was down with jaundice for a while, and they put me on the drawing board again, and I was drawing plans for some of the buildings there at the academy at Point. So that was interesting, and it delayed my sea time by a month or two, which was all right because things got kind of tight along the East Coast during early 1943.
Right.
So that's when they were losing ships. But
Okay, so then you finish that work, and then you go on board ship. What were you sailing on first?
it was a Liberty ship.
Okay.
We shipped out of Mobile, Alabama.
Mm-hmm.
We loaded cargo, which was mostly ammunition
Mm-hmm.
and some poison gas.
Okay, I think you can.
He's got somebody here right now, but he made his list out, so I'll take it, okay?
Okay, so you've got a cargo of ammunition.
Where's Kurt's list?
On the kitchen counter.
Okay,
It happens.
Okay.
Okay.
sorry.
So you've got a cargo of ammunition, and where are you going with it?
Well, we didn't know
Mm-hmm.
at that point, but while I was leading up to this, it was rather interesting because when we finally loaded and we were on the way down Mobile Bay,
Mm-hmm.
the pilot ran aground and bent the rudder post.
Oh.
So we had to go back into port,
Mm-hmm.
the ammunition depot, unload every stick of ammunition until the ship was completely empty before we could go into dry dock
Mm-hmm.
to have the rudder
3 minutes.
straightened out. So it was a nice
I'll go over.
deal because part of our project as a cadet was a sea project, which
Grand Valley.
was part of our
Did you hear that he was going to do?
curriculum at the academy.
Mm-hmm.
So it enabled me to
Strawberry.
examine the ship from bow to stern And a lot of the work that was in the sea project you never could have done without being in dry dock. So I was very, very lucky there. So we went back down and reloaded, finally got out. We went over to New Orleans, picked up some of the convoy there, and then went from there up to New York, where we were going to get our orders.
What do you remember about that voyage from New Orleans up to New York? Did anything happen, or was it quiet?
Well, it was different. We had to run black, so there were no lights allowed. They even at that time they had the lights on the East Coast were blacked out, so they wouldn't silhouette the ships for the subs to get. And I had phoned my dad before I left that I would meet him at Grandma's house. My grandmother lived on Staten Island. I couldn't mention where I was going or anything, but I told him I'd meet him at Grandma's house in 10 days. That's all I could tell him. So he and my mother went down to my grandmother's place, and we anchored in New York Harbor right off the Statue of Liberty. I could see her apartment from the ship, never got ashore. He looked out, he saw the harbor was full of ships. The next morning when they got up, he looked out, there wasn't a ship in the harbor.
Wow.
We sailed at 4 o'clock in the morning
Okay.
and cleaned out. We were headed for England.
Okay. What time of year was this?
This was in July
43?
of 43.
Okay.
Say normally we'd have been in convoy in April or May, but that's when all the grief was going on.
Yeah, the May of 43 was Black May. That was
That's
the one
right.
where the most ships were lost total.
Right.
Yeah.
So we were very fortunate there. These little things that happened kept us out of harm's way for a while, and it was a blessing. But we made up convoy and went up to Halifax, picked up more ships there, and then headed for England. Our destination was Belfast in Ireland to get further orders. And from there we were sent to Cardiff in Wales.
Now, on this first voyage, are you still kind of midshipman cadet, or
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And so, what are your duties as a midshipman cadet? What do you do on that ship?
As I recall, I was lucky. I had a decent captain. Some of my comrades that were on ships where the captain wouldn't even speak to them because they thought we were just surplus baggage.
Right.
But it was to learn all we could about handling a ship and navigation, and as much as we could pick up. When I got to England, when I was in Cardiff, I went to London and bought a sextant for myself, so that any time I wanted to take sights, I could, because I had my own sextant. There was one aboard ship that the mates were allowed to use, but it was sometimes not available to a cadet.
Right.
And we got all the dirty jobs of going down, taking the bilge soundings every day.
What's that?
Once a day we had to go down and sound the bilges, which meant going down into number 4 and 5 holes in the bowels of the ship next to the shaft alley. And we dropped a chalked lead down into the pipe, and the water level would erase the chalk on the lead. And we'd bring it up and we'd record that and then enter that in the log every day. And that was my job. One that I didn't enjoy because you were confined to a very small area. And I wanted down and up as fast as I could. I wanted to be on deck. I had no interest in being in the engine gang, the black gang as they called it. But it was... and the ship was, rolling and pitching, and so it was, you had to be on your toes.
And so taking the sounding wasn't necessarily quite as simple as it sounds.
No, it was, You had to be accurate, and but had to be quick.
Okay. Now, was the convoy that you were traveling in from Halifax, was that a fast convoy or a slow one?
There were no fast convoys except the ones that had troops.
Mm-hmm.
They had the faster ships.
Right.
So our convoy, if we were lucky, we made 10 knots.
Mm-hmm.
It was a large convoy. We had very minimal protection.
Mm-hmm.
At that time, we were only allowed, I think it was 4 Canadian Corvettes.
Mm-hmm.
And they weren't much use in heavy weather. They rolled back and forth. They were just terrible. They were like corks.
How did your Liberty ship do in the heavy weather?
All right, I would say. As ships go, they weren't fully loaded. They were pretty oil because they sat low in the water. But it was, we had, I think started out, we had supposed to have 96 ships in the convoy. I think we wound up with maybe 80.
What happened to the rest?
Oh, dropouts. They weren't prepared to sail for one reason or another. They could have had a breakdown or whatever. Didn't make it. But I have all the data from the archives of the ships and the names of the people in the crew, and so I have all that collection as memorabilia. So it's interesting to look back on.
And did you record, say, what the convoy's number was or something like that?
I think, yes, I have that. I think it was HX244, which was Halifax.
Because that kind of thing can be looked up, so we'll record that and
Yeah.
have that.
I can verify that. I have that.
All right. So you've made it over to England for the first time. You've gone into Cardiff. You've gone to London. What did London look like at the time, or what impression did you have of it when you were there?
It was a mess. There was a doctor that had come to this country to go to Harvard Medical School, and he lived directly behind us in Newton, and he'd gone back to London. So when I got there, I looked him up, and that was a blessing because he took us, or took me, and showed me where I could buy the sextant. And we went to Selfridge's department store, which later got bombed out. There'd been a big air raid just prior to our arrival there, up to about a week before they were under siege. And so while we were in port, everything was quiet for 2 weeks while we unloaded. Thank you very much. And then a week after we left, the air raid started up again. So here again was somebody upstairs taking care of us, and we got out of there.
Okay. What impression did you have of Cardiff? It was mostly a coaling port before the war.
That's true.
What did it look like?
Cardiff was rather untouched. They didn't get in that far. That wasn't their main interest, I guess, at that time. Cardiff was interesting. I went to Cardiff Castle, which had 12-foot thick walls, and very interesting place. But we traveled around as much as we could if we got any time off, but we couldn't venture too far from the ship. I saved up enough time by swapping watches and so forth to have time to get to London to meet my friends. But one of the things that I did, I took a pound of butter and a dozen eggs, as I recall, and gave those to my friend, and he was thrilled with them because butter over there at that time, no way, they couldn't get it.
But your ship was well provisioned, so.
Oh yeah. But and it was okay. It was with the purser's or the steward's permission, so I didn't do anything that was illegal. So.
And how did the people in Cardiff or London treat you, or did they Were you wearing
very well.
Were you in a uniform of some kind as merchant marine, or were you in civilian clothes?
Uh, Civilian clothes when we went ashore.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, it's hard to remember. That was 65 years ago.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but they were very nice. We had no problems at that point.
Okay.
I ran into some interesting problems on another trip, but
All right.
that's,
But we're not there yet.
No.
Okay. So then, when you ship out of Cardiff, then where do you go?
I think we left Cardiff and we went to Le Havre in France, and we picked up 200 barrels of wine to bring back to the French consulate here.
Now that would be, though, if you made your first voyage in
43.
43, Le Havre, I mean, France isn't invaded until 44.
Well, then it was on a subsequent trip
Okay.
because I went back over there again to
Mm-hmm.
into the Bristol Channel again. I think it was probably the second trip that
Okay.
that happened.
And can you remember then what did you basically just head back across the Atlantic
Yes,
from England? Then?
we
Okay.
came back to New York.
And was that an
Terrible trip.
And what happened during that trip?
It was in fog for 13 consecutive days.
Mm-hmm.
We had to travel on with dead reckoning. We never saw the sun, star, or moon
Mm-hmm.
the whole time. So everything we did had to be based on dead reckoning, which was a lot of factors you have to figure, whether you're headed into the Gulf Stream or whether you're not, the condition of the sea. We used a taffrail log to plus the pitch of the propeller to know how far the ship would be propelled in decent conditions. All of those factors go into it.
And after 13 days, how close were you to getting it
We
right?
were within 13 miles of our estimated position,
Well, that's pretty good.
which was almost fantastic because we didn't have radar.
Mm-hmm.
That was strictly old type navigation.
And if there wasn't anything to navigate by with the radar, that
Wouldn't make any
if
difference.
you're out in the open ocean.
No, but you know where the icebergs were and you know where the ships were.
Uh-huh.
That would have been a help, but we couldn't see anybody. We came at literally within inches of a collision in the fog. A ship cut across our bow, and we just missed him. The bow lookout saw the shadow soon enough to holler, and we pulled hard left, and in that length of time it took for that ship, it takes a little while for a 10,000 ton ship to pull
Right.
and get moving, and once it moves pretty fast. But we just missed it. You could have stepped from our bow onto his quarter.
Did you have any? Were there any U-boat scares while you were in the fog?
We had a lot of alarms, but no action. We heard occasionally they had depth charge drops, but we heard them, but that's all we knew about.
Was the escort force any larger on the way back than it was
No.
on the way over?
No, that was pitiful. So, but then we got back to New York and reloaded with more. This was all more general cargo for supplies for the troops in North Africa, and we went to North Africa to Casablanca. The convoy itself was destined for the Mediterranean. 15 of us broke off and went into Casablanca.
Was the trip over to North Africa eventful, or was that relatively quiet?
Well, a lot more quiet than the North Atlantic, which was kind of a frantic place to be. That weather up there is just insane. But we had much better protection. We had an aircraft carrier with us, several destroyer escorts, and a couple of destroyers. See, that was all controlled by the Americans, where the English or the Canadians said the North Atlantic,
Right.
and they just didn't have the ships to get the job done.
Mm-hmm.
But the main thing was that we got the bulk of the convoy got through, and that was the way Churchill figured it should be done.
Mm-hmm. I mean, with the North Atlantic ones? Or,
Yes, yeah.
Okay, I got it.
Get as many through as you can, as much cargo as you can, and
Mm-hmm.
we'll hope for the best.
Yeah. And did you have trouble with U-boats or German aircraft when you were going to North Africa?
We didn't, but they lost some ships the next day after we broke off from the convoy. We went into Casablanca, as I say, and unloaded there, and that was an eye-opener to me. I'd never seen so many tanks and trucks, and of course we had a lot of those on deck as deck cargo.
Right.
But they were lined up out in a field for miles, as far as you could see, and just getting ready for when they had to push across North Africa.
Okay. So do you remember when this was roughly?
Well, that was in the fall of, let's see, July.
That'd be fall of 43. So
Yeah.
So by then they've cleared North Africa, but they're preparing. The invasion of Italy is in September of 43. They've already been to Sicily.
Well, a lot of this material that we took over
Mm-hmm.
was, they lost so much in North Africa.
Right.
Then it was there for the invasion
Right.
to go into Italy.
Right.
And their theory was that if they lost a truck or a tank, just leave it. If they couldn't repair it, they had to bring up a new one, go on from there. You could never go back. So it was a supply line.
Right.
So that's.
But of course, at that point, I mean, Casablanca is some ways away from where they loaded up in Italy. Do you?
Oh, true, but they unloaded there and then went across from. They didn't. Let's see. I guess it was in Tunis
Mm-hmm.
and Algeria, along and through there, that they loaded for Italy.
Mm-hmm.
But that was later on.
Right.
So
Okay. So you've done that. Did you get to see anything of Morocco? Did you get off the ship and look around Casablanca?
what I could. It wasn't the greatest place in the world at that time. The smell of untanned leather and flies and are the things I remember the most. It was unbelievable for a boy that had grown up outside of Boston. This was a culture shock, believe me.
Right.
So, but then we came back from there and came back to New York, I think. And that's when I got off the ship and went to the academy.
Okay.
So I had made 2 trips before going to Kings Point.
Okay. And describe Kings Point for us. I mean, you've given us kind of the location and you told us about the estate setting and so forth. What kind of training were you getting there? What were you doing?
That was comprehensive training. Everything from cargo handling to ship construction to rules and regulations, rules of the road, everything that pertained to working towards your license by the Coast Guard. Signaling, navigation, of course, that was one of the main courses. I had first aid, mechanical drawing. That was right down my alley. That was fun. So it was a cram course. We were in class from 8 in the morning until 4 in the afternoon, every day. And so then you had a short break for chow and a little bit of activity, loosen up. If you had extracurricular activities that you wanted to get involved in, you could for a short time. And after dinner at night. It was back at study for 3 hours. 10 o'clock was lights out, and we start over again.
Yeah. How long was this?
That was a
period?
9-month course.
Okay. And was it one that most people got through pretty well, or were there people washing out, or?
We started with 48 in the section and wound up with 24.
Mm-hmm.
So there were a lot of washouts.
Did you find that you were going in with more experience or background knowledge than a lot of them, or did a lot of them have the same kind of experience that you did?
Well, they had similar experience as far as being aboard ship.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that I noticed was that I was the youngest in my section.
Mm-hmm.
I was up against fellas that had graduated from law school.
Mm-hmm.
Some had had 3 years of college.
Mm-hmm.
So there was stiff competition.
Mm-hmm.
But I managed to hold my own in the crowd. But I think a lot of it was due to the real interest that I had in the water.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them were in it just because they had to be,
Yeah.
I suppose. But I thoroughly enjoyed the work, and when you enjoy what you're doing, why, makes it easier.
Certainly.
So, and I must admit, I did quite well. I finished 4th in my class, so
Mm-hmm.
I was proud of that.
Okay. Did you get any time in the weekends or anything like that to go into the city, or?
Oh, yes. Although I was company commander of the rifle company,
Mm-hmm.
and I did go, when I got liberty to go in after we had a dress review every Saturday,
Mm-hmm.
and of course I had to perform at that. And then I could go into New York. And my sister lived in Mount Vernon,
Mm-hmm.
which is a suburb, and that was handy because I could go stay with her.
Right.
So I could stay Saturday nights with her and then come back on Sunday to the academy. So,
And then when did you graduate from the academy?
in October 1944. So,
Okay.
on the 13th of October.
All right. And then what did you do next? Are you put on a new ship now to go out again?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
I was put aboard the Kemp P. Battle,
Mm-hmm.
and I made 3 trips on her. We went, one of them was to Marseille, France.
Mm-hmm.
We had to wait to get into Marseille Harbor because the Mariposa had just arrived with troops.
Mm-hmm.
And it took every tug in the harbor to get her in and out, so we waited outside. And after we unloaded, then we loaded up Arabs
Mm-hmm.
and took 500 Arabs back to Oran.
Mm-hmm.
That was quite a trip.
What were they doing in France in the first place?
I have no idea, and I could care less.
Were they civilians or people of all ages and stuff?
Oh,
Were they mostly
yeah,
men?
all ages. But on the way to Oran, every one of them was seasick.
Mm-hmm.
I tell you, that was the one time in my life I was always happy to be way up on the flying bridge because I got fresh air up there. But we had to hose the ship down about every 20 minutes to a half hour. And it was a mess. But we made it.
Mm-hmm.
Got there.
And did you head back to the U.S. from there?
Yes.
Okay.
Had an interesting event happen on the way. It was a clear morning, and we were breaking down convoy to go through the Straits of Gibraltar.
Mm-hmm.
And you broke down from the columns. You were lined up probably 12 columns across the convoy, and you had to break down into 2 columns to go through Gibraltar
Right.
because it was rather narrow. Well, we were proceeding to get into column, and the ship ahead of us, instead of following orders and dropping back and then up into his new position, made a hard right and pulled over and smashed into the ship next to him.
Oh.
Cut a big hole in number 4 hatch right after the housing, and both ships caught on fire. So we had a Dutch captain, Peter Dowling, who was 300 pounds if he was an ounce.
Mm-hmm.
And he got very confused and frustrated when something happened. And he immediately blew the abandoned ship signal for us. We weren't the ones that got hit,
Yeah.
but we calmed him down and told him, Captain, this isn't right.
Mm-hmm.
So he did listen to us, and so he got off the bridge and tried to calm down.
Let's see, were you a third mate at this point, or?
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
I was the third mate. And when I got into Iran, I looked over on through the glasses, and there was a ship there that had gotten into dry dock.
Mm-hmm.
See, we had gone to Marseille
Mm-hmm.
first, and so when we came back into Iran, one of my classmates in high school was port supervisor there in Iran. He's now deceased, but Bob McGrath, and I spotted him on the ship that had been hit.
Mhm.
It was in dry dock. So I hollered over to him on the bullhorn, and he said, "As soon as you dock, come over and see me."
Mm-hmm.
So he gave us a Jeep. It was at our disposal while we were in Iran,
Mm-hmm.
which was wonderful because we could travel a short distance from
Right.
Iran, and that's when I saw my first camels, and very interesting.
Did he tell you what happened or why their ship got hit?
No, it was just pilot error or captain error, or whoever was on the wheel didn't do what he was supposed to. And so one of those things, but they had to repair the ship before it could go on. It took on quite a list. They did get the fire out, and they had to tow it in.
Now, did the rest of the convoy go on?
Oh yeah,
Okay.
yeah, nothing stays. You move unless you're hit or something.
Mm-hmm. And so how was it that your ship wound up turning around and going back to Iran then?
Well, it was part of our program to go to Marseille first,
Okay,
and
so that was going out.
that was an experience in itself because we were one of the first convoys to go in through Gibraltar
Mm-hmm.
that would allow you to burn your running lights. And so when you got a beam of Europa Point, you're allowed to turn on your running lights, which we did. And up ahead of us, we were probably, 10 or 12 ships back from the leaders.
Mm-hmm.
The Commodore of the convoy was a Navy tanker with 20,000 barrels of high octane
Mm-hmm.
aviation fuel on board. The minute he turned his lights on, he caught 3 torpedoes.
Wow.
A German sub had drifted in on the tide,
Mm-hmm.
and the PBYs hadn't picked him up,
Mm-hmm.
and so they never found anything from that ship. But it was like a stampede,
Mm-hmm.
because all the fast tankers and stuff started going past us like we were standing still,
Mm-hmm.
because we could make maybe 10 knots and they could go 20.
Mm-hmm.
So we felt that the safest thing to do was to head up the Spanish coast and get out of their traffic, which we did, and they sprayed out into the Mediterranean. And so that's how we got over to Marseille.
Mm-hmm.
But that was interesting.
Yeah.
Marseille, most of those French ports and Italian too had cathedrals up on top of a high hill right by the port, and most of them were done in mosaic inside. It was beautiful work, and I remember that. So we got back dumped our load in Oran, and then came back to the States to reload again.
Mm-hmm.
and made another trip over. This time we went to Italy
Mm-hmm.
and started out in the Adriatic, went to Trieste,
Mm-hmm.
coming back through the Adriatic, we were headed for Ancona, as I recall, and a water spout appeared not too far distant from our ship,
Mm-hmm.
and it was fascinating to watch it, as long as it didn't come over your ship.
Right.
But we watched through the binoculars, and it was just like someone had turned on a huge faucet
Mm-hmm.
and was drawing all the water out of the sea
Mm-hmm.
up until the cloud couldn't hold it any more water, and it rained.
Mm-hmm.
But it also rained fish.
Uh-huh.
So we had fish all over the deck of the ship, and we had to hose that down and clean it up. From there we went around the boot, went through the Straits of Messina,
Mm-hmm.
went through there at night. Now it's quite a wild night because they had a storm,
Mm-hmm.
and we went up and anchored in Naples
Mhm.
Harbor. And while we were in Naples, there was an air raid, and we had mail that we were dropping off there for the troops, and we had Italian stevedores that came aboard to unload, and when the air raid signal went off, you couldn't find a stevedore anywhere. They split, and my gun station was up on the flying bridge, of course, at a 20 millimeter up there. And on the way up to my gun station, there were 2 Italian cruisers that were tied up in Naples Harbor.
Mm-hmm.
And I had no idea this was going to happen. And I just about got to the top of the ladder, and these 2 cruisers opened fire on this plane.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought the end of the world had come. And down below I went, down to the boat deck, till I saw what was going on. And then back up again. Well, it turned out it was nothing but an observation plane
Mm-hmm.
that was taking pictures of the harbor to see where the ships were and what their location was.
Mm-hmm.
So the next day we left Naples and went up to, we were supposed to go to Genoa,
Mm-hmm.
but the Germans still held Genoa, and you could actually hear the gunfire.
Now they would have held Trieste as well at that time. You said you went there, but in
Well-
the Adriatic. But you couldn't have gone all the way up there. This is still late 44, early 45, because the Germans are still there.
Well, maybe. Well, we weren't in Trieste very long, I know that.
Well,
And but anyway, instead of going to Genoa, they sent us into Leghorn because that was as far north as we could go. That was known as Livorno.
right.
There was a ship that was sunk in the entrance of the harbor, and it was blowing too hard. We couldn't get in there because we had just a very, very slight
Right.
clearance. So they sent us back down to Piombino to anchor overnight until things calmed down. The next day we went back to Leghorn,
Mm-hmm.
and we got through okay and tied up, and we unloaded cargo there. So a couple of days before we were to leave Leghorn, a British ship came in alongside, and it was they had cattle on deck,
Mm-hmm.
and it was a terrible looking ship, an old rust bucket,
Mm-hmm.
and carrying a load of benzene. Well, that's not the best cargo to be tied up next to
Mm-hmm.
in case there was an air raid or
Right.
anything. So, in order for them to go ashore at night we could go into town.
Mm-hmm.
The British sailors had to cross our deck
Mm-hmm.
and go there. And they get kind of juiced up with the local spirits, and,
Mm-hmm.
but they weren't too complimentary about the Americans. And they damned everything that we did and condemned Lend-Lease and the whole works. So the night before we were to leave Leghorn, they switched the ships,
Mm-hmm.
and they tied up against the dock, and we were
Right.
on the outside so we could leave first thing in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the boys on ship decided they'd treat this fella to a real treat, and they went into this bar, and he got absolutely polluted till he passed out.
Mm-hmm.
So they picked him up and carried him down the street to a tattoo parlor,
Mm-hmm.
told the fellow what they wanted done, paid him,
Mm-hmm.
and we left.
Mm-hmm.
We never did find out how he enjoyed his new addition, which on his chest was the American flag
Mm-hmm.
with "God Bless America" tattooed. And we sailed, goodbye, and away we went. So that was an interesting experience. But while we were there, we got to go to, we saw the Leaning Tower of Pisa,
Mm-hmm.
and we were allowed to climb it at that time.
Yeah.
And since then, I believe
It's been closed and reopened because it was
it's reopened
yeah,
now.
Yeah, it was open even in the late 70s,
Oh.
and then they closed it for a while where they were unleaning it because it was leaning too far.
Right.
And I think they have reopened it. But anyway, but you were
Yeah.
able to go up it.
Yeah, it's a funny experience
Mm-hmm.
because going up one side of it is very easy.
Mm-hmm.
Going up the other side, you're working against gravity.
Right.
And it's a real workout to get up there. But we climbed up, and it's a rather interesting place to be.
Mm-hmm.
So,
What impression did you have of the Italian population at that point? Because you're seeing Italian civilians in different ports and places as you tour around.
well, we didn't get involved with the peasants too much,
Mhm.
the natives,
Right.
because we were busy. We had duties aboard ship,
Mhm.
of course, every day, and watches to stand.
Mm-hmm.
Mount Vesuvius erupted, or was erupting at the time that we were there in Naples. But we were distant enough so we could see the smoke and all coming out. But that was, and we got to Pompeii,
Mm-hmm.
so we weren't totally unaware of what was going on around.
Mhm.
Pompeii was a very interesting place, and quite interesting to see the size of their structures.
Mm-hmm.
And they were all, of course, the population in those days was much smaller.
Mm-hmm.
So they had maybe 5-foot people, where we were 6 and
Mm-hmm.
over. So it was quite, you had to duck to go through doorways and things like that. But they were very, very intelligent, very smart people. They had stepping stones across the street.
Mm-hmm.
So if they had heavy rain or anything, why, they could cross and not get their feet wet. But the stones were spaced so that the wheels of the chariots could go through
Mm-hmm.
and not have to worry about that.
Okay, so as you're kind of getting ready and you leave Italy, then you're going out of Livorno, then do you head back to the States again from there?
Yes.
Okay.
Mhm.
And then is there another voyage after that?
Yes, there was one more.
Okay.
The President Roosevelt died
Mm-hmm.
in '45 when we were in the Mediterranean on the way back.
Mm-hmm.
It was early, well, mid-morning, clear day, sun was out. Those things you remember.
Mm-hmm.
So we got the message on the shortwave.
What opinion did you have of Roosevelt at the time?
He was our friend.
Mm-hmm.
he was all in favor of the Merchant Marine. He was responsible for the building of the Liberty ships.
Mm-hmm.
He called them the ugly ducklings because they weren't, they weren't sleek ships
Right.
like the Navy had, but they got the job done. They were cargo carriers, is what they were. The design was actually from a British design ship, but they were we were able to build them in mass production, thanks to Henry Kaiser, for one, and he built a lot of shipyards on the West Coast, and he had his shipyards compete with each other to see how fast they could turn these ships out. Well, originally, I think the first Liberty took about 9 months to build.
Mm-hmm.
They finally got it down to where they built the Perry, and that came off the ways in 4 days and 15 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And it was in the water. It wasn't outfitted, but
Mm-hmm.
but one of the reasons that was able to happen was the fact that we got into welding
Mm-hmm.
and away from rivets. Now the riveted ships were clumsy and much heavier
Mm-hmm.
because of the weight of all the rivets and all. But the steel plates they could use didn't have to be as heavy,
Mm-hmm.
and the welding was faster. They could prefab the ships in sections and bring them in, and that's how the speed developed to turn them out so fast.
Now, what were you giving up when you switched from rivets to welding? I mean, did it make the ship in some way structurally weaker?
Yeah. Some of them did break.
Mm-hmm.
There was one spot that was weak right back of, let's see, forward of the wheelhouse, the midsection, and after number 3 hatch, right in there was a weak spot.
Mm-hmm.
As a matter of fact, they, when they were having problems that way, they put belly bands around the ship. And these were steel plates that were probably 4 feet wide. They'd go 2 feet on either side of the main deck, and they'd rivet all the way around.
Mm-hmm.
They'd have 4 rows of rivets, 2 above and 2 below. And if you ever want to have trouble with your fillings,
Mm-hmm.
be aboard ship when they put belly bands around them, because it was endless, day and night, of this constant riveting. But it was to strengthen the ship in that area.
And was that something that they would actually do while underway and at sea?
Oh, no. That was all done in the shipyard back
Okay.
here. So,
Was that trip back from the Mediterranean, was that a relatively quiet one?
yeah.
Okay, and then you make your last ship, and is this the one that again takes you to England and France, or?
No, I made 3 trips on the battle.
Mm-hmm.
The last trip I made was on a Maria Mitchell, and that went down to South America, but the war had ended there.
Mm-hmm.
So we got to travel alone, no convoy.
Mm-hmm.
That was a joy.
And what were you doing going down to South America?
We took coal
Mm-hmm.
from Philadelphia down to Santos, Brazil.
Mm-hmm.
From there we loaded dunnage, went down to Argentina, stopped at BA, and then went up the Parana River for 200 miles to Rosario.
Mm-hmm.
Very interesting trip, that 200-mile trip. It seemed like the whole river was moving.
Mm-hmm.
The crocodiles, barracudas, all of that was piranhas.
Mm-hmm.
As we went along, and it was in a delta where you could see over the
Mm-hmm.
low undergrowth. But the Graf Spee had been sunk down there, the German pocket battleship. And we saw the superstructure of that as we went by. That was off Montevideo.
Right.
But when we got up to Rosario, that was, they were having political upheavals then. And the first night we went ashore, there was gunfire in the streets. And boy, we didn't travel alone. Believe me, we went in groups. And you hear gunfire, well, you flatten against a building until you know what's going on. But we took on bulk corn up there and then we came down and topped off in BA, because you couldn't load fully because of the river draft. But we came down and topped off in BA and then went to, from there back over to Africa. It was interesting in BA. We went, the last night we were ashore, we'd met in a bowling alley, a fella that owned a cattle ranch, and a lot of his gauchos were in the bowling alley, and he invited us to come out to the ranch the next day to have dinner with him and see the ranch and all. But we sailed the next morning and weren't able to go, so, and he knew this ahead of time, that it was very possible we wouldn't make it.
Right.
So, and we went up through the Canary Islands. That was a long trip, going from down there way up to, and then into Philippeville in Algeria. So, and we unloaded there.
Okay. One of the things that you mentioned a little bit earlier was getting over to Le Havre in France and having been in the Bristol Channel more than once. So was there another trip there that we didn't cover earlier? And do you remember, what do you remember about going to France or seeing Le Havre? I mean, do you remember anything about that?
Yeah, I remember the sub pens there, because that was Admiral Donuts had a lot of his subs stationed there, and they it was one of the things that created a big rift with the Americans, with the French, because we had gone in to bomb these sub pens, and they laid a patch right up through the center of town. They just missed the pens, but they destroyed everything in sight up through town, and so the French were very upset over that. But they were pretty well protected. And in those days, you didn't have to be far off. You know, before they came up with a northern bomb site, and I don't know what the timing of that was, but they became more and more accurate with their bombing. So you only had to be a little bit off with wind or whatever, and you miss your target.
Yeah, and actually, when with the submarine pens, they were so well fortified in the first place that it didn't matter all that much.
Underneath.
Yeah, I hadn't been aware that Le Havre was a place where they had a lot of that. Most of it was farther south, the Bay of Biscay, La Rochelle, places like that. But any of the French ports were ones where the U-boats could have put in. So.
Right. Well, they had 2 or 3 ports. Brest was one of them, I think.
Yeah, Brest, Saint-Nazaire, La Rochelle
Right.
were main ones for that kind of thing.
So.
This tape is going to be about up, so I'm going to stop that here.
Okay.